Hello and welcome back to our bite-sized video series on digital reform. Today we're going to look at the Online Safety and Media Regulation Act, and in particular the Act's focus on the protection of children online through new concepts like harmful content and age-inappropriate content. To provide some insight into these topics, I'm joined by my colleague Alison Peate, Associate in the Technology and Innovation Group.
Thanks, Aoife.
So Alison, a lot of people will have heard about the OSMRA and its focus on creating safer online spaces, particularly for children, and they might also have heard of this concept of harmful content. I was wondering if you could unpack for us what this concept actually means.
Yeah, no problem. So under the Online Safety and Media Regulation Act, there is this kind of new regulatory concept of harmful content. And the Act provides for two main categories of harmful content under the Act. So the first category of harmful content will be content relating to criminal offences. So this type of content is already prohibited really under pre-existing legislation, and it will cover things like child sex abuse material, terrorist content, or content that reveals the identity of a complainant or of the accused person in a sexual offence case.
Yeah.
So, like I mentioned, there are already prohibitions on the sharing of this type of content under pre-existing legislation.
Yeah.
So it'll be no surprise really that this kind of criminal offence content is designated as harmful content under the Act. The second category of harmful content is kind of the newer part of the definition of harmful content, and it's where the definition gets a bit broader. So the second category of harmful content is content that has the potential to cause harm. So the Act will designate certain types of content as being potentially harmful content, and then that content will need to meet a risk test in order to be considered harmful content under the Act. So things that are likely to be caught there are things like serious cyberbullying, content that promotes disordered eating, or content that promotes or gives instructions in relation to self-harm. So if the content falls within one of those kind of types of designations of content, it will then need to meet the risk test, and that test is that it poses a risk to the life of an individual, or it poses a significant risk to the physical or mental health of an individual, and that risk is reasonably foreseeable. So for the second category of content, it needs to fall within one of those designations and then meet the risk test.
So a lot to unpack within the concept of harmful content there.
Yeah.
So it seems like kind of a key distinction coming through from what you said there is, you have your first category of criminal offence content, and that this is automatically considered harmful content. And then you have your second category of potentially causing harm, and you have two steps to meet there. You need to be within a designation and then also pass a risk test.
Yeah, that's it exactly. So for the first category of harmful content, the content in relation to criminal offences, that's automatically harmful content under the Act. So it'll automatically be regulated by the Online Safety and Media Regulation Act. Whereas for the second category of harmful content, the content that has the potential to cause harm, like you said, it has to be designated as potentially harmful by the Commission, and then it also needs to meet that risk test of posing a risk to the life of an individual or posing a risk of significant harm to the physical or mental health of an individual. So if it meets those kind of two tests, then it will fall to be regulated under the Act.
So I think that second concept, the newer, broader concept, it's really interesting, especially with the examples you've given of the types of things that are potentially going to fall within it. Serious cyberbullying, promotion of self-harm or disordered eating. And it just strikes me that these are all types of content. We'll have seen a lot of kind of this type of negative content online ourselves, but it's all types of content that could have a particular impact on children considering their vulnerability. Is that focus embedded in the concept of harmful content, or how does that come through?
Yeah, definitely. To be honest, it's embedded throughout the Act. Protecting children and providing a safer online environment for children is really embedded throughout the Act. And like you say, particularly when you look at that second concept of harmful content, or the second category of harmful content under the Act, when you look at the types of things that are designated as potentially harmful, and then you consider the risk test, I think anyone can be exposed to a risk of harm by viewing that type of harmful content, but it's more likely that children are at risk of significant harm given their particular vulnerabilities. And I think the risk test allows an element of flexibility to factor in the particular vulnerability of children and the risks that are posed to them by exposure to that type of content. So in addition to that second category of harmful content, there's also several explicit references throughout the Act to protecting children, focusing on risks posed to children in particular. So for example, when the Commission is designating types of content as potentially harmful content, it must consider in particular the risks that might be posed to children by exposure to that content. And also when the Commission is making its online safety codes, again, when drafting those codes, it must have regard in particular to the interests of children and the rights of children. So I think it's evident if you have a look at the Act that there is a clear focus on protecting children and providing a safer online environment for children. And I think it's something, that's really important. And I think we'll all agree, including parents and anyone in society, that it's an important aim.
Absolutely. So not just shining through the concept of harmful content, but kind of the Act more broadly as well. One other concept I wanted to ask you about was this concept of age inappropriate content as being relevant to the protection of children. Could you unpack a little bit for us what's included in that concept?
Yeah, sure. So that kind of does what it says on the tin, really. It's content that's not appropriate for children generally, or for a particular group of children, given their particular vulnerability being a certain age. So again, when you're looking at age inappropriate content, you must factor in the particular vulnerabilities of children at a particular age. So look at children's capabilities at a particular age, their developmental stage, and their rights and interests, and assess then if the content is likely to be appropriate for that age group. So things that are likely to fall within the concept of age inappropriate content are content relating to pornography, for example, or content that kind of gives a realistic representation of serious acts of violence or serious acts of cruelty. And again, you must assess that type of content through the lens of a child user and see whether you think that content is appropriate or inappropriate for a particular age group.
Thanks, Alison. That kind of flexibility within the concept of age inappropriate content, it's interesting, and I know it's something you highlighted for us earlier with that risk test, that it has that kind of flexibility to take into account particular vulnerabilities of children. I'm just thinking to kind of round off our discussion of the new concepts you've taken us through of harmful content and age inappropriate content. What's kind of the practical side of how these will be regulated or enforced under the OSMRA?
So under the Act, there will be online safety codes. So the Commission must prepare the online safety codes, and they will contain the obligations that organisations have to comply with in relation to the availability of harmful content online. And then in relation to age inappropriate content, the Commission will prepare kind of guidance notes and advisory notes for organisations in relation to how to manage age inappropriate content online. And the aim of the codes, the online safety codes really, is to limit generally the availability of harmful content online and to prevent the risks to users associated with the availability of content. So really to protect users generally from the harms associated with exposure to harmful content, and in particular in relation to children then, to protect child users as well from the harms or the potential risks associated with commercial communications. So there you're thinking about things like advertising or promotional materials.
So worth mentioning those online safety codes, while they're obviously eagerly anticipated by organisations and by parents alike, they haven't yet been published, but obviously we're on the edge of our seats watching those developments. I also just think it's interesting, throughout this discussion to see how the regulatory lens in terms of protecting children has really broadened. It's a direction we saw with the DPC when they published their children's fundamentals and kind of gave this particular spotlight to the protection of children's privacy, that we're now seeing the regulatory lens broaden out to other ways in which children can be protected online through the use of legislation.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's a good thing. It's really important that regulators are not only focused on children's privacy, but also more generally on making the online environment a safer space for children and protecting children from the harms that they could potentially be exposed to by viewing potentially harmful content. So I think it's something that will be welcomed generally in society and probably particularly by parents.
Well, thank you very much for sharing all of those insights with us today, Alison.
No problem.
So that's all we have time for in this video, but all of the videos in our digital reform series are available on the Arthur Cox website. And thank you very much for watching.